Hello everybody, we're going to be talking about section 8.5, this time complex numbers. And we have a number of goals. We want to be able to simplify complex numbers, be able to add or subtract them, multiply or divide the complex numbers. But before we can do any of that, the first thing we have to do is give a definition. What is an imaginary unit? As you probably are well aware, if I were to ask you to give me to find something like the square root of negative 49, as in this particular example, I know that I would have a little bit of trouble. The reason why is that over the set of real numbers, there is no real number that would satisfy the equation. Why? Well, one might be tempted to say, well, what about negative 7? Is it negative 7 squared 49? Well, no, because negative 7 squared means negative 7 multiplied by negative 7, and that is a positive number. So that won't work. That's no good. Positive 7 either. Of course, as we know, positive 7 squared is also positive 49, and so we don't seem to have any real numbers that do it. So instead, we have to resort to using another type of expression to stand in for the square root of negative 1. And so we use what's called an imaginary unit. Now, don't get the wrong idea. It's not imaginary in any sense. It's only about as imaginary as a negative number. So, when we say I equals the square root of negative 1, what we're really talking about is a number that is going to stand in for the square root of negative 1 so that we don't have to carry around a square root of negative 1 everywhere we do any calculations. Okay? So all I, the number I, which is called the imaginary unit, is a stand-in for the square root of negative 1. That's it. So, if you keep that in mind, it makes the rest of this easier. Like, let's talk about the square root of negative 49. If I were to reduce that, we're going to use this rule right here that says the square root of negative a is the same thing as the square root of negative 1 times a. And so we would just replace the square root of negative 1 with the convenient notation of small case I. So in this case, if I talk about the square root of negative 49, I could think of this as the square root of negative 1 by this rule times the square root of 49. And we know that the square root of negative 1 is going to be replaced by I. And the square root of 49, well, that's 7. And we would write this as a imaginary number 7I. And that represents the square root of negative 49. It's still the 7 times the square root of negative 1, but I takes the place of square root of negative 1. What about something like this one, this middle one, where we have the negative of the square root of negative 8? Don't those negatives undo each other? Well, the answer to that one is no again. And the reason why is that a negative sign that is outside of a radical cannot be brought in to treat the negative sign on the inside of it. Whatever result we get from b here is going to be negative itself. So let's talk about it. Square root of negative 8. Well, the negative square root of negative 8 is going to be the same thing as the negative of the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 8. If we're using our rule, remember that if you take the square root of two numbers a times b, it is the same as taking the square root of a and multiplying that by the square root of b. Okay? That should be a b right there also, a times b. Okay. So right here, this is going to be negative I times, well, let's see if we can reduce square root of 8 at least. That's 4 times 2 under the radical. And we know that the square root of 4 is 2. So we've got negative I times 2 times the square root of 2. Now, the typical way of writing this one is going to look like this. It will be the same thing as 2. Let me take care of that negative here. I guess I need to handle that. It's going to be the negative 2I times the square root of 2. It's typical to put I before a square root so we don't get mixed up with what's under the square root and what's not, and the negative number, or the whole number, integer before I. So negative 2I squared or 2. Okay, C. Well, let's work on this one. This is a really similar idea, right? We're going to be taking negative 4 times whatever we get from the square root of negative 27 So we use this rule to handle the square root of our negative and rewrite it as negative 1 times the square root of 27. And 27 we happen to know to be 9 times 3. So if we separate that out, we're going to be negative 4 times I from our square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9, which is 3, times whatever's left over in the radical, that's 3. Multiplying the pieces that we can multiply together, 4 times 3 is 12, so we're going to have negative 12i times the square root of 3 as our simplified form. Okay, more to come in the next video.